Hello and welcome everybody to another Ask Me Anything session here with the Prisma engineering team. My name is Nicholas Burke. I'm a developer advocate at Prisma, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues today. Why don't you quickly go ahead and introduce yourselves to our audience? Alberto, why don't you start?
Sure. Hi, Alberto here, Decomine Online. I've been working with Prisma for a bit more than 3 years, maybe 3 years and a half. I mostly work with the anything that has to do with the Prisma repo. So the Prisma client, the Prisma CLI, some of the engines, the WebAssembly integrations, new features, Prisma config. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And how about you, Will?
Well, as you said, my name's Will. I'm the engineering manager for the Prisma core team, which is responsible for the Prisma repo and the ORM in general. I've been with the company for about 7 months, and my job is, among other things, publishing the roadmaps, writing articles, all the highly visible stuff that you see my name on, and answering questions in these AMAs.
Yes, and if any of the people watching have ever spent any time in the Prisma ORM repo, then I think it's highly likely that you probably already interacted with either Alberto or Will there. They're all over the place on GitHub. And today, the topic of our Ask Me Anything session is the new Prisma client generator that we released a couple of weeks, maybe even already months ago. And but we don't want to limit it to that, right? If you have any other questions about Prisma, what we're doing, Prisma Postgres, the company, any product, then feel free to share these questions with us. We're monitoring the comments on YouTube. We're also watching on Twitter and on Discord in our Dev AMA channel. So if you have any questions, drop them in either of these places and I'll bring them up. And we also collected a couple of questions beforehand. And let's dive right into the new generator. And before we start talking about, maybe just give a very high-level overview of what this new generator is, Alberto, and then also talk about some of the advantages that we think this new generator is going to have compared to the current one, Prisma Client.js.
You're muted.
Oh, and now we can't hear you.
Oops, sorry. So the new generator, which is only called Prisma-client, we rolled it out a few releases ago, and the idea is that we have this new generator that adopts practices that are well suited for modern tooling, that is ESM first, and also that provides more escape hatches in case you need them with the complexity of the modern tooling. Definitely, it has more flexibilities and capabilities compared to the old ones. So a few examples of how it is different. Well, first of all, with the new generator, you can get multiple, like the generated client can be split into multiple small files rather than having a single huge TypeScript file being emitted. Now, why is that helpful? Well, the TypeScript compiler prefers manipulating and handling many small type files compared to a single one. So
We had a bunch of GitHub issues on this topic, right?
Yeah, we have a bunch of GitHub issues that we try to tackle with that. Also, the Prisma client is just generated code, so it kind of makes sense for generated code to be to be well integrated with your code environment, with your bundling system, with your TypeScript configuration, and so on. This is why we now allow you to emit TypeScript files rather than plain JavaScript. You can also, like previously, we used to generate the Prisma client instances and all of those definitions within node modules. Now that's great for the X, at least with the tooling that was available back then. The old generator has been around forever, since before I joined Prisma. But over time, it also encountered some drawbacks as the ecosystem has evolved. So for instance, whenever we will regenerate types via Prisma generate, and your target output was not specified, so it will just point to the node modules folder, we will just try to, we will update those type definitions but the LSP, so the TypeScript server living in your editor, will not react to those changes because it was not monitoring the node modules folder. Or if you were performing some installations with package managers, I think Yarn was the case. If you were running Yarn install, then the package manager will delete any file that it didn't explicitly track. So since we were managing the Prisma client files within node modules, we were kind of interfering and overstepping the boundaries expected by the package manager. So eventually we realized, in order to solve all of these problems, in order to be ESM first, in order to adopt the evolving Prisma architecture, we rolled out the new generator, which will also shaking and things like that.
So to quickly summarize, the advantages of this thing are it's ESM first. You get TypeScript files as your generated output instead of JavaScript. It's many files instead of one big file, which is problematic for editors and TypeScript in general. Did I miss anything?
And also, you can explicitly configure the JavaScript runtime you're targeting.
I know there were some complaints from people who wanted to use JavaScript and didn't want to use TypeScript. Do we have a plan for that?
Yeah, that is actually still possible. There are some configuration options. We can also go through them later. Again, this is part of what makes the new generator more flexible, more adapt to the modern workflows.
All right, thanks for that overview. And one question somebody raised was, why did we even decide to build a new generator? Couldn't we just have gone and kind of just evolve the old one? I mean, we already have one. Why did we introduce a second one?
Yeah, so long story short, we wanted to perform a bunch of changes, and those changes were not possible to implement in a retroactive way. But before stepping away from the old generator, we need to have time to kind of experiment with the new one. And right now it is in the Prisma client generator is still considered experimental, but we have very high confidence internally. And we want to actually use that as the new generator for Prisma 7. So right now we're gathering input from our users, we're gathering issues, and we're also solving them as they come. And it allows us to integrate the new patterns, the new edge cases that get brought up to us, so that we make sure that Prisma works well with them. Plus, the old generator was using practices that were quite outdated. Again, the ecosystem, the JavaScript ecosystem, the TypeScript ecosystem evolved massively in the past few years. Also, like new JavaScript runtimes popped up. When we started with the other generator, basically only Node.js was around. Dino was still starting. Right now, we have there's also Versal Edge Lite. There is Cloudflare Workerd. There is Bun, etc. And we want to make sure that the new practices we adopt are better suited and for the days forward.
Yeah, the Prisma client JS generator, the current one, it really was conceived like in a very different time, right? Only 5 years ago in 2020, that's when it was the first version of it was built. But if we think back in terms of how the technology landscape and our TypeScript ecosystem has changed since then, 5 years is a very, very long time, and a lot has happened since then. So this Prisma client, this new Prisma client generator kind of is the modern version that's reimagined, the Prisma client generator reimagined to what would it look like if it was built today for the today's ecosystem.
Exactly.
The new generator, and that's a big change, actually. That's going to be like a breaking change for people when we're making that the default in Prisma 7. It requires an output path. So it will not generate code into node modules anymore. And that has its upsides and downsides, right? Because I think that this approach of generating into node modules, on the one hand, felt very convenient, very familiar, but why did we decide to now make the output path required? What was kind of the motivation for that?
Just before we answer that question, it might be worth recapping for people who aren't aware of what this output path means at all.
Fair
like
enough.
when we say we're generating stuff into node modules, what are we talking about? Concretely, if you're an application developer consuming Prisma, what changes for you?
I think it would be nice to take a look at the documentation we currently have available, just the fields, the configuration, like the fields that you can use to configure the Prisma client generator, and maybe offer that a comparison with the old generator.
Let's do that. Do you want to share your screen, Alberto?
I can do that. I can do that,
Okay.
yeah.
Then let's do that. I think that's a great idea, because I think if you actually look at the generator block and see the difference between the current one and the new one, it'll make a lot of these things a lot more clear.
Yeah. So
I remember when I was developing applications and using Prisma, I didn't know that it was generating code anywhere in particular. I knew I had to run Prisma generate, but didn't really know what effect that had, or why I should care about what an output path is.
Fair.
Yeah, so this is the old Prisma generator. You see Prisma client.js. Normally, you will only specify the provider, which is just the name of the generator. And sometimes you will define the list of preview features that you want to use with Prisma. And very few people, I would say, knew or have used this output option, which essentially tells you where you want to store the generated JavaScript files. And by default, if you don't provide this optional field, we will just generate the Prisma client into node modules. So essentially what happened, you will install Prisma and you will install @prisma/client. If you didn't run Prisma generate and you tried to have these import Prisma client from Prisma client, then you will find it from the node modules. You will try to use it. You will invoke the constructor, and then it will fail. It will tell you, hey, you're missing a generation step. And then if you run Prisma generate, we will actually go and write some JavaScript files under, node modules, Prisma client, etc. And then the next time you will try to import Prisma client with the same import path as before. So from the module name @prisma/client, the JavaScript runtime will resolve those files from the node modules folder. But as we hinted before, this has a whole set of problems. The TypeScript LSP is not aware of changes over there. Some package managers really didn't like that we were messing with the node modules folder, so we were modifying that folder, and they were also watching it, and they will see discrepancies that were unexpected, so they will just go ahead and clear them. Also, we got some issues were raised by maintainers of these package managers too internally. So essentially, we are right now with the new generator. We are trying to, first of all, adjust the boundaries. Like node modules is a responsibility of PNPM, NPM, yarn, Bon, whatever. It should not be tempered by libraries. And we also want to ensure that to make the experience also more integrated with the modern bundlers that are ever evolving. Also, they have like different complexities or different maturity stages. By bundlers, I mean Webpack, TurboPack, Vite. Essentially, the code we generate for the Prisma client should be part of your code base. And if you want to use that with a bundler, you should be able to have that sort of integration that will also allow you to to have a smaller bundle size at the end of the day. And yeah, it's supposed to be working better. So yeah, maybe let's take a look at the fields that we have available right now. Let's see, the provider name is now Prisma-client. So this is the new one. Again, the output label is here. The output field is here, but now the output field is mandatory. So this, you see here, it's required. And that's a big change. And then we have a bunch of other optional fields. Now we make them optional because we try to provide you some reasonable defaults. And we also try to infer the values here depending on the projects from which you're running Prisma Generate. But sometimes, configurations are not always that easy to introspect and infer, so we allow you to customize them. Let's go through them. Runtime. Well, this is probably the most important one. If you're deploying Prisma on a traditional server or on AWS Lambda, nothing really changes for you. Even if you deploy that your web application on Vercel and you don't use middlewares, you don't use the custom Vercel runtimes, it will also work out of the box for you. But in case you want to use middlewares, you want to use the runtime edge, or you want to use Cloudflare workers, Cloudflare pages, you want to use Dino deploy. By the way, with the new generator, thanks to this new generator, we were able to support Dino 2 out of the box. So that was a huge experience improvement for the Dino users. So yeah, if you want to customize the runtime, this is the option to manipulate. And then what about the module format? When the old Prisma generator started, everybody was still on CommonJS. And in many aspects, the Prisma client JS generator is CommonJS first. Now, with the evolution of the JavaScript ecosystem, this had to change. So now the Prisma client is ESM first. We still support CommonJS if you need that, and you can specify CJS in here, in this module format option. But yeah, by default, we're gonna it emits ESM compatible files. Then what about the generated files? So we're emitting files with the TS extension. You know that in general, we always emit TypeScript files, right? But depending on your configurations in TS config, or depending even on the default options for your JavaScript runtime, your system might have different expectations about how to resolve files. So usually you have .ts, this is the standard, but you can also have MTS for the ESM compatible TypeScript file. Usually these two are equivalent, but not always. Again, it depends on your system, not on Prisma. And CTS is for like TypeScript files that should use CommonJS tooling. So for instance, in MTS, you're supposed to have access to import.meta APIs, and you won't have them in CTS. Whereas in CTS, you will have access to __, their name, and so on. This goes into technicalities, but just so you know, we try to be very flexible on that. So that if you encounter a use case that Prisma maybe doesn't support out of the box, you still have a way out and you still have a way to kind of configure that while you maybe open an issue to ask us to see if we can improve the experience over there. And then also the import file extensions. By default in the JavaScript world, you used to be able to run import from ./index. You normally wouldn't think about the importing from index.ts, index.js, etc. But again, depending on your bundler of choice, on the options set up in your package.json or TS config, you will encounter some projects that require a mandatory extension for imports. So yeah, we also give you the option to configure that. And that is mostly it. So when it comes to the big change, at least from the configuration point of view, compared to the previous generator, is remember to update your provider to drop the -js here. It's just prisma-client. And the output now is mandatory. So yeah, my personal recommendation is if you're starting from a greenfield project, so if you're starting from scratch, just start with this new client generator. Again, it's still technically experimental. We're going to go to preview very soon, and we also aim to go to GA by the end of August. But the more you try it, the more feedback you give us, the more chances we have to refine the user experience before we go GA. So yeah, if you are in an existing project, I will recommend you to try at least the new generator. You might not switch right away. Maybe there are some things that might not work out of the box for your experience, and you want to backtrack to the old generator, which is stable. But please, at least try. So again, you can provide very valuable feedback for us. Thank you.
That was a great overview, Alberto. Thank you. I think especially just seeing the fields and seeing what's different compared to the current Prisma Client JS one is very instructive. And of course, when the time comes with Prisma 7 and people will need to upgrade, if they want to upgrade to the next major Prisma version, then of course we'll have a lot of documentation and guidance for people to help them with their upgrade paths. Before we continue with more questions about the generator, I would say that we quickly pick two questions that came in from the audience. One on Discord, or rather on GitHub, but we found it through Discord. Our former colleague John was so kind to raise it to our awareness. And then another one from YouTube. Let's start with the YouTube one here. From Ben, when is better support for SQL views coming? And why does Prisma not add decorators for validation in the Prisma file? So the attributes that we have in Prisma schema, why don't we have things for validation there? Two questions, and I think they're best suited for you, Will.
Great. I love questions. SQL views is something we're working on very soon. We expect to bring this to GA. We already have a preview feature for views. We'll bring it to GA in the next couple of months. We plan to start working on it in about 2 weeks. We don't know exactly the timeline for when it will come out, but we'll be able to give you more updates as we go. And you should see over the next couple of releases, more and more of the views behavior becomes more solidified. The APIs will be stabilized, and will address people's reported issues. So if you've tried using the views preview feature and you have an open GitHub issue, we're going to be either fixing it or explaining why it's not going to be addressed and closing it. If you have issues that you haven't reported, do so, because we're looking at it now. In the next couple of months, it's going to GA, so we're stabilizing the API. That second question is a bit of a cheat. These are two questions in one comment. Why does Prisma not have decorators for validation? Prisma's goal is to provide a schema for you to describe the structure of your database. Validations are something that are often implemented as client-side validations. There's a lot of space here for interpretation. Should we be doing something like what Zod does, or archetype, where when you try and construct one of our data transfer objects, we will allow you to validate its structure? Or is this something that we should be interpreting as a database constraint? And in some places, like how you would implement it in one case or the other has semantic differences or nuances that aren't immediately obvious. So this isn't a direction that Prisma has even attempted to address. There are already a wealth of libraries available to solve this problem for you. There are even Prisma generators that will take your schema and then give you Zod structures or archetype structures that you can use to validate your JavaScript objects. So Prisma, why doesn't Prisma add decorators for this? Well, because this isn't something that Prisma does. It might be in the future, but it isn't yet.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we do have open GitHub issues, and the way how I personally could imagine this to be implemented is to just implement check constraints, right? Because this is just like a database feature that a lot of people will want to use. And because our Prisma schema is supposed to be like a pretty much direct representation of your database schema, but in a declarative way and easier to read. I think that implementing check constraints at one point would be a nice thing. But again, as you said, Will, because there is like such a plethora of ways how you can achieve this today, this is not really a priority for us. I think the old saying there goes, like, we have bigger fish to fry at the moment.
To add a little bit more context there, you're right. It's always Prisma's goal to expose more native database concepts to our users. So check constraint is a really good example. We want to give people the ability to specify the constraints that exist in their database. The other direction we want to go over the course of the next year is expanding people's capabilities to extend Prisma's behavior themselves. This can be things like, if you want to have validations that you write into your Prisma schema and you want to generate actual client-side validations, we want to make that process easier. It's not straightforward to write Prisma generators right now, but our generation pipeline is something we want to open up to users to extend themselves. So this isn't something you'll see in the next release or the one after that, but in the course of this year, this is the direction that we're moving towards.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Will. And there is another question on GitHub posted in the roadmap issue from the previous quarter. And that's about D1 migrations and a timeline for that. Do you have any info on that, Will?
Yes. D1 migrations was something really important to us, is still something really important to us, but we hit a couple of roadblocks there. We're currently doubling down on our work with the query compiler so that we can remove everybody's need to package Rust native binaries, which, as we talked about before, causes problems for people all over the place. So we're working on this now. Then we're working on bringing the multi-schema preview feature to GA and the views preview feature to GA. And once that's done, we want to get back to our D1 migrations and, in general, removing the Rust binaries from the Prisma CLI that you use on the command line. So I can't give you an exact timeline on this. It's high on our priority list, but it's not the thing we're working on right now.
Fair enough. Thank you. And I think everybody watching this building software kind of can relate to the prioritization struggles that you sometimes have when you're building software. So hopefully people understand that we can't always work on all the things that we actually want to work on, right?
Yeah. But what we're trying to do is make it clear what matters to us. And we're trying to take input from the community as well to give us direction in the prioritization decisions that we make. Currently, top of our list is getting rid of those Rust binaries. And that's proven to be quite a significant challenge. So it's thrown a bit of a spanner in the works for all our other projects. Once that's done, we can get on to the other things we know matter to our community, like improved D1 support.
Right. Will, you brought up an interesting topic, and that's the query compiler. We also sometimes just call it the Rust-free Prisma ORM because we are removing the Rust engine binaries from Prisma ORM, from the Prisma client library. And people have been wondering, how does that relate to the new Prisma client generator? Can the two be used together, or is this Rust-free thing only with the current Prisma client JS generator? Like, what's the deal there?
Yeah, maybe I can also take that. So technically, even though we have been approaching these two problems sort of independently, they overall contribute to the same goal. So if you use them together, by the way, you can already, like you can have the Prisma client JS, Prisma-client generator, the new one. You can use that, and you can specify the preview feature query compiler plus driver adapters, and you can have all the query compiler benefits for you, which will essentially, what do they contribute to? They contribute to faster performances. You're also going to have a lower bundle size, which is quite important for the edge environments, those platforms that tend to put lots of constraints over the size of your deployed project. And plus the new Prisma client generator, it doesn't have some of the pitfalls that the old one had. Like sometimes it will forget about copying certain Rust binaries. For instance, if you are developing in one environment and you're targeting, I don't know, AWS Lambda on a different Linux distro, on a different CPU architecture, etc., usually the runtime, so at Prisma/client, will not work unless you would specify new native targets, things like that, and you will need to remember to copy them manually into your deployment folder. We scratch that. We're gonna make it much easier in that direction. Yeah, well.
And that made it really difficult for people who are working with like Vercel, Next.js, or like really common package setups for SvelteKit, any newcomer who is trying to use Prisma, it would throw up roadblocks for them, right? Because you have these files that don't get copied in the normal deployment processes we follow for all these typical setups.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We will not have that. We will not need to copy anything around. The Prisma generator will only, so for instance, new Prisma generator with the query compiler, we will just copy one WebAssembly file around, and that's it. And that will be integrated. Like we will provide linkage to that. It works out of the box with some bundlers already. For some others, we might evaluate. We will provide you some helpers to do that. But yeah, you will not need to customize your deployment scripts anymore.
And what's the query compiler's database support?
Well, actually, the support that we have right now is gonna increase. So we are expanding over there. So for the next release, so actually let's backtrack. We already support SQLite via the Better SQLite adapter, via the libsql adapter. We have the D1 too. Then Postgres via adapter PG. Is there
SQL Server?
I think we already support
SQL Server.
SQL Server, yeah, PlanetScale too. And we're gonna roll out support for during the next release. So like in a few days, maybe next Tuesday or so. We're gonna support MySQL and MariaDB using the new MariaDB adapter. So that's gonna be at prisma/adapter-mariadb. And we have shipped support, or it's already in Prisma Dev, by the way. If you install like the latest nightly version of Prisma, you're gonna have access to, you can use Neon with the query compiler, and you will be able to use CockroachDB again with at prisma/adapter-pg. So you're not gonna need a different adapter for CockroachDB.
So by next Tuesday, for the next release, you'll be able to use any of our first-class databases and any of our supported databases with the query compiler in preview, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Big step.
So yeah, as well as mentioned before, we're really focusing on stabilizing the query compiler and all things that are related to that, while also stabilizing this new Prisma client generator that we really wanted to try and we wanted to experience. By the way, maybe just a small spoiler, we also fixed some of the issues that were explicitly referencing the Prisma client generator just this sprint. And we aim to do the same for the next one too. So yeah, be on the lookout for that.
All right, thanks for that overview and that little excursion into the query compiler world. Let's go back to the generator. One question that somebody raised was, what are some pitfalls that you're currently aware of? Because right now the generator is still experimental. So why is it even experimental? And yeah, what are the pitfalls? What do I have to be aware of when I use it?
Yes, so the whole reason why this is experimental is that, first of all, it's a complete re-architecture of the way the code generation worked. So yeah, it's a different package with a different logic and many more options. And the thing is, these options, we've seen maybe a matrix of 4 optional options, right? Optional configuration parameters, how you want to call them. The thing is, some of them influence each other. So like the matched combination of possibilities for things that can go on a good path or on a bad path at runtime is actually quite huge. And we have some tests over there. So we're testing the new Prisma generator with some frameworks, some bundlers, some runtimes. But yeah, we don't really have 100% coverage right now. We haven't even tested on some of the maybe frameworks we're less familiar with. And also some issues we're still solving them as they come in. For instance, one I solved very recently was about Next.js 15 with Webpack 5 using ESM. By the way, news for everybody. I know people have been struggling with monorepos with Next.js. Like we had to maintain a plugin for, I don't know, for a while with the old generator. Well, nothing of the sort is going to be needed anymore. Actually, I will share some examples with you later. At least we will share them next week, but you will see a preview of those examples. So you can see that those situations that used to be huge pitfalls with the old generator actually now work well. And about debug fix with Webpack, yeah, it's just that Webpack is a funny bundler to work with. It was also started in a different time, and this is probably also why the Next.js team is moving on to TurboPack, which, by the way, the new generator, the new Prisma generator supports out of the box. Sometimes, bundlers have different stages of maturity, or they support different features. They don't necessarily align with the features supported by Node.js, ban out of the box. So yeah, it's kind of hard work to make it feasible. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and there are also, you already mentioned one here in terms of the edge cases, and these are very specific sometimes, right? They really depend on framework version, bundler version. So are you aware of any other edge cases that people should be aware of?
Sure. Normally, like the base case user experience with Prisma is maybe you have a full stack application, I don't know, a React app with some SSR on the backend that is fully integrated in your framework, and you will use Prisma client on that backend side. And you will expect that it always runs in a familiar environment. So you would expect, you're developing normally on your device. You're probably using Node.js or Bun, and you expect the backend runtime to match that. Well, it turns out that's not always the case, and sometimes you are not even aware of that unless you really go through the documentation of your framework or on the deployment platform you're using. I'm going to make probably the most, I wouldn't say troublesome example, but one use case that took us a little bit to figure out initially was that if you use Next.js and use middlewares with Next.js, then you're always going to use the Edge runtime. They call it Edge Lite or Vercel Edge runtime, which is essentially a sandbox where you don't have access to a bunch of APIs. So you don't have access to most Node modules that come with default with Node.js, like Node column module, Node.fs. You cannot read the file system. You cannot evaluate functions out of the blue. You have a limited WebAssembly API too. And the thing is, even if you try to use PG, just the plain driver without Prisma, you're going to have a whole bunch of issues, and it's not going to run on the edge. And you will not realize that until you figure out that your middlewares in Next.js actually run in a different runtime than the rest of your application. Every other page, normally, if you want to opt in for the edge runtime, you need to specify. You need to have an export const runtime equals something. That's not the case for middlewares. So yeah, what happens with Prisma? Well, if you want to use both the Node.js runtime and the Edge runtime, you actually need to specify two clients. And the idea is that you will use have a generator client block that is used by Node.js, and you're going to specify the runtime property. The runtime key will be set to Node.js. And then you will have another client block, and you will need like a generator block, and you will need to specify the runtime as Vercel or Edge Lite. I think those are the names of the properties. Vercel is just an alias for the Edge Lite. And you will use that only in the middlewares or only in those pages for which you specified the alternative runtime. And yeah, we will see an example of that later. But yeah, that is, I will say, a convoluted example that people may fall into without really realizing at first. Whereas normally in most other scenarios, you are sticking with one runtime. Like even if you are deploying your application fully on the edge, again, it's fully on the edge. Like if you're using React Router on Cloudflare Workers, it's there. you don't have scenarios where sometimes you use Node.js and sometimes you use Cloudflare. It's just one runtime, so it makes it much easier maybe to understand, to debug, and to generate code for.
Right. For next steps, and also you mentioned like support of various frameworks. Like, what's the timeline that people can expect, and also priority of different frameworks that we are looking to integrate? And then Sumit also posted a comment on YouTube, and I think they're lucky because we had a demo planned anyways, and they're asking for a demo with the Turbo repo integration of Prisma Client. So I think we'll pick that a bit later. But let's first talk about timeline and framework priorities before we go into the demo.
Sure. So essentially, we are currently, let's just say that the Prisma generator already works with frameworks, in theory. Like there is no reason why it should not work with those frameworks. But what we're currently doing is we are investigating different combinations of toolings, of runtimes, of bundlers with the edge cases. Essentially, most of the issues that have been raised on the Prisma repository are about these edge cases. Sometimes you spend so much time working on Prisma itself, you're not necessarily looking at all these frameworks out there for a while, and then new patterns evolve, or like new weird or unexpected features appear that use different runtimes under the hood. And users, of course, want to use that. And we're trying to make it more smooth, right? So let's start by priority. We're sort of going by order of popularity. So this sprint, or like these 2 weeks, essentially, we're focusing on Next.js. We really want to make it work out of the box. We want you to be very happy with the experience over there. And in particular, we are looking to improve the experience with Webpack. It already works out well with TurboPack, with the previous minor version of Prisma that is already out, right? And from the next version of Prisma, the Webpack experience will also be smoother. And we're considering both runtimes that are supported, so both Node.js and Vercel Edge. Then, in the next 2 weeks, we will be focusing on the Vite ecosystem, starting with React Router. So React Router / and or Remix, which are pretty much the same at this point on Node.js and Cloudflare Worker ID. So the runtime of Cloudflare Pages, Cloudflare Workers. And other than that, still within the Vite ecosystem, we are considering Nuxt, which should be like, technically, if one with framework works, the other should work as well. But sometimes different frameworks might have different defaults, different TS config options, or might also have, I don't know, additional bundling tooling that influences Vite. So yeah, we're going to take a look in the next. We're going to finalize this by the next 3 weeks. That's our goal.
All right, this is super exciting. I am very much looking forward to this thing going live for full general availability, hopefully in not that much time in the future. But in the meantime, we're going to release a couple of examples that will show people how to do that. You're currently working on these examples, Alberto. And here we've been asked to show what it looks like with Turbo Repo. Do you have an example prepared with Turbo Repo? I think we have one with TurboPack. I don't know.
I can do one better. I can show you both with Turbo Repo and with Webpack.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, I will start with Webpack, if that's okay, because I already prepared that first.
Sure.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Oops. Yeah. So what am I looking at? I'm looking at the Next.js starter Webpack project. You're gonna see, maybe we will not have the same name, but you're gonna see this project next week. Right now, essentially, I have. Let's take a look at the schema file. I'm using this generator client here. I'm using quick compiler and driver adapters. I am telling Prisma where to store the generated Prisma client. That's going to be in lib folder .generated Prisma. By the way, we recommend excluding the generated client from your Git repo. So add that to your git ignore. Yeah, we're on Postgres. Actually, we're using Prisma Postgres. So maybe we can also talk about it later. And let's take a look at the package JSON. Important thing here, we're using type module, which means this is an ESM first project. We're building with Webpack, and the only difference in terms of building with Turbo Repo will be to add Turbo here. Right now we're using Webpack. We're not using any custom config, so this is the experience you will see out of the box. But let's take a look at the DB helper here. This is something that imports Prisma client from the generated folder. I'm also importing the PG adapter, and I'm essentially exposing a getDB function and initializing a Prisma singleton that I can use elsewhere. And what you will see if you run this is a selection of quotes from the internet that are actually stored in Prisma Postgres. Yeah, we have 30 quotes in total. We're using enums here, by the way. We have 20 opinions and 10 facts. So these are 2 enums. And let's take a look here. This is a client-side block. So this is using use client, and it is actually able to import and use the Prisma enums as values. This is possible only with the new Prisma client generator. And by the way, here it says there is one issue. This is not an issue with the project itself. It's just that since I'm using client-side, and this client-side thing is rendered first on the server side and then on the client side, Next is complaining that I have a render hydration error. But yeah, so this is not a problem with Prisma. As you see, the output here is quite clean whenever I'm using pnpm dev. I can also run build, yeah.
For people who might be wondering, why is it a big deal that you can import enums from your generated output?
Right,
Wouldn't you expect that's the case?
That was not possible with the previous generator. So right now we are actually, let's take a look at the generator client here. We have this generated folder with Prisma. Normally you will just import client, right? As we've seen in the DB, where was that? You will import client from which you access Prisma client. But if you want to re-export other things and that you won't consume on the client side, you need to essentially import it from a different path, as you can do here. And why is that the case? Because Prisma client relies on APIs and modules that are only available on the server side. And if you try to use them within use client block, so on the client side, you will just have errors, and you don't want to have that. So it doesn't make sense to use Prisma client on the client side. You only use that on the server side. But if you want to use something that is generated by Prisma client, by Prisma generate, and you want to leverage that as a value on the client side, now you can. And the example here is with enums, because we had so many issues about enums, and we just decided to showcase that. Now, one user wanted to see this with Turbo Repo. TurboPack. So if you want to use that in dev, you specify --turbo here. I think you can specify --turbo here as well. I have another example in a PR somewhere. Actually, I can just copy what I did here. But I think you also need to specify, let's see. Oh, it's --turbo pack probably. Yeah, anyway, I can just run it and it should work out of the box. Yeah, it's using TurboPack here. Okay, we have some warnings about PG. Let's run. Yeah, So that's all you need to change. By the way, notice how I didn't need to change anything here on the generator. And the other example I wanted to showcase, which is a little bit more convoluted, let me close, sorry, yeah, is the one about using Node.js and Edge runtimes. So I'm going to start with the schema. We have two generators here. The first one is identical to the previous. And the second one is using still Prisma client, but it's modifying the runtime. So this one essentially has a default runtime of Node.js. And this one is for the Edge. And why is this for the Edge? Because we are actually, we have a middleware down here. And we know that middlewares run on the Edge. Yeah. Technically, there is an experimental flag you can set in next config to not run them on the Edge, but again, it's experimental on their side. So we don't want to see that. Oh, what happened here? I guess I forgot to run npm install first. I'm generating the clients. See how I generated two clients. One goes to lib-generated Prisma. One goes to lib-generated Prisma Edge. Of course, these two output paths need to be different. And we have two utilities here. db is exactly the same as before. And we have db Edge. In this case, I'm still using Prisma Postgres, but I'm using the accelerate version. So the accelerate extension, and I'm running npm dev. I'm still on Webpack, by the way. And I'm rerunning this. Okay, let's run it again. I may not have the, let me modify this. I may not have the right environment variables. That's a concrete possibility because I was modifying this example just a few moments ago. I think that's the case. No, okay, that works. Yeah, that works. This example first run a middleware. The middleware introduced some artificial delay on the edge, while you're also using the Prisma client accelerate. You returned a stream, a promise of results from the database, and it sent those results to the client via SSR. So yeah, these are this is, I would say, one of the scenarios in which people had most pitfalls. This combination of multiple runtimes.
Very cool.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm really looking forward to having these examples ready. People can just look at our Twitter or a blog. Next week, we're going to publish these in the Prisma examples repo, and then you can play around with that yourself. We're looking forward to your feedback, your questions, your concerns. You can reach us on Discord, on X. And with that, I think we're done with today's AMA session. We don't have any more questions. So, Will, Alberto, thank you so much for joining me today, and looking forward to the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. See you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.